After a hiatus of about 5 years and some delays, the Saints Row series is finally back. With developer Volition still at the forefront of the series and no new GTA games in sight, you might be thinking now is the perfect time for the Saints Row franchise to make its mark in the modern age. The old fans welcome back and eventually win new ones. However, initial reactions to Saints Row 2022 have ranged from mixed to downright hostile. What easily should have been one of the biggest games of the year is now receiving widespread fan reaction. As is often the case with divisive popular media in the internet age, the rhetoric surrounding Saints Row has spread so quickly that it can be hard to figure out what it's really about. So, while some people have many different opinions about Saints Row, here's a quick look at some of the main reasons why this open-world crime game is getting a lot of hate right now. Some fans think the Saints Row reboot is too woke. While I'd like to avoid this particular controversy altogether, you can't fairly discuss the Saints Row backlash without addressing the fans who claim the reboot is too woke. You see, the original Saints Row games were notorious for using over-the-top, no-prisoner-taking humor that was often compared to South Park. The Saints Row franchise has always looked for ways to make a name for themselves and differentiate themselves from the competition, and this style of humor and general absurdity has long been their best weapon in this fight. In general, the ridiculousness of Saints Row was its greatest asset. You may or may not find things like dildo bats, dubstep guns, or an auto repair shop called Rim Jobs funny, but the franchise's willingness to really lean in that direction certainly helped it find a public. In fairness, this approach has also contributed to some of Saints Row's best moments. There aren't many games that start with a gang leader becoming president of the United States and eventually gaining superpowers to defeat aliens, but that's exactly what a game like Saints Row 4 offers. However, this willingness to go that far and grind absolutely anything meant that Saints Row often went too far. Saints Row games have always been riddled with homophobia, racism, numerous instances of sexual violence against women played for laughs, and many other instances of crude content, often justified in the name of parody. The series has actually gotten a bit better in this regard over time. But there's a degree to which that means the franchise to accept at its best, to be willing to tolerate, neglect, or yes, even love games at their worst. At some point, the offensive nature of the Saints Row series became one of its defining characteristics. From the outset, the developers of the 2022 Saints Row reboot were clear about their desire to tackle some of the most offensive elements of Saints Row while retaining some of the absurdities that helped shape the rest of the franchise. Opera. In an interview with GamesIndustry.biz, Saints Row producer Rob Loftus provided this explanation of the team's desire to not only reboot the franchise, but also re-examine some of the themes upon which the franchise was built. It wasn't a choice where someone on the publishing side or someone on the business side said, "You know what? Tastes in society have changed and we need to change Saints Row." It was our own mindset that caused this. I think a lot of content creators and brands are trying to expand their audience, and that means not connecting with that kind of humor. It's about connecting with a type of humor that's more suited to a wider audience. After these statements were released, some Saints Row fans subscribed to the idea that the reboot's creators were dishonestly waking up their game to appeal to a wider audience. Some of those fans are just the kind of people who would be offended by something as simple as the reboot's use of neutral pronouns to describe the player character, while others have tried to argue that the developers of the reboot were ignoring the kinder, softer sides from previous games in the Saints series, suggesting that the series needed a complete tonal overhaul. I'll have more to say about Saints Row's writing, humor, and tone in our review of the game, but one thing I think it's important to understand about this particular controversy is that it's kind of a life of its own. Before anyone actually played the new Saints Row game, there are many criticisms to be made of Saints Row, but if the reactions to this game seem particularly scathing at times, it's because the fans behind them have been mustering their outraged resources for months. They've been waiting for a chance to attack this game because of a belief they formed a long time ago. Ultimately, it's incorrect to say that the Saints Row reboot never had a chance to please those who decided to hate it based on its existence, but it's fair to say that the game would always be controversial about it. Saints Row's new cast of characters represents a shift in tone that some fans refuse to support. This point goes more or less together with the previous section, but it will suffice to treat it as a separate topic. In short, some gamers absolutely dislike Saints Row's new cast of young characters, largely based on the idea that they are designed to appeal to Gen Z gamers, hipsters, terms used to describe the alleged demographics of the game. Again, some of that vitriol can be traced back to the belief that Saints Row is trying to wake up. The game's slightly more diverse cast of main characters is definitely its main focus in that regard. Crucially, however, other fans of the franchise are appalled by some of the larger thematic differences between the older Saints Row games and the reboot. While some would always be upset that the Saints Row reboot doesn't feature any of the franchise's most popular characters, there seems to be a lot of hatred for this particular cast of characters. I've heard the new crew of Saints Row mention everything from Fortnite rejects to would-be TikTok influencers, and these are the descriptions I'm happy to share with you. Mind you, the sheer hate towards the main characters of this game has been around since before we even knew anything more than what they looked like. I don't even want to try and get into the psychology of this whole thing. But for a variety of reasons, the main cast of 2022's Saints Row has really gotten under the skin of those who claim to be fans of the real Saints Row games. Honestly, I think the new Saints Row has an identity issue that affects the quality of the cast. However, as I mentioned above, it's important to realize that hatred towards the game's cast has been building ever since some gamers have set their sights on the title. Sometimes it can be difficult to separate fan rights criticisms from creative criticisms, especially when you are talking about a game that is currently being criticized from all sides. However, as always, being able to do just that is still important. The Saints Row franchise has disappointed some fans for many years. While the first 4 Saints Row games have generally received fairly positive reviews, there has been some backlash against the franchise since Saints Row 3 really embraced the more absurd elements of the first 2 games. Some enjoyed this downright ridiculous twist, while others felt the series went too far in this direction. Many people from both camps hated 2017's Agents of Mayhem, a Saints Row spin-off that fully embraced the cartoon vibes of Saints Row 4 on Saturday morning and made sweeping changes to the franchise's gameplay formula. I think quite a few people heard Saints Row Reboot and immediately imagined a game that would take the series back to its more grounded roots. Instead, they saw a reboot that maintained the series' ridiculousness while ironing out some of the franchise's rougher tonal edges. Admittedly, the game's first trailer wasn't great, but that would certainly help explain why some of those initial reactions to the reboot were as passionate as they were. In a way, the anger you might see in Saints Row in 2022 is fueled by years of disappointment with the franchise itself. We know why those who enjoyed some of Saints Row's more recent games are disappointed with the changes this reboot brings, but it's fascinating to see them joined by those who haven't seen the series in years. Do it again. Like I said, it's kind of the perfect storm of outrage right now. I've written an entire article on this particular point, but it's certainly worth noting that some of the anger you see towards Saints Row is directed at the game's various technical issues. While Saints Row is far from the greatest AAA game I've played in recent times, it's still a very buggy game that will annoy those who don't typically tolerate technical glitches in video games. There's also the increasingly popular idea that some studios feel a bit too comfortable releasing games that are sometimes considered unfinished games. This idea rarely lives up to the efforts of the people making these games, but it is the environment in which this reboot will be released. I should also mention that some have complained about the Fortnite art style and overall graphics of the game. While many of these complaints are more representative of some of the audio and content controversies mentioned above, some criticism has been leveled at the overall quality of the game's graphics. Own eyes tell you, even those willing to try Saints Row will find a game with some issues. While waiting to share some of my final personal thoughts on Saints Row until I've had a chance to spend some more time with the game, I can reiterate the opinion that many have hinted about Saints Row in the first exam scores. At the end of the day, the game has a lot of issues. I sincerely respect developer Volition's attempt to retain the best parts of previous Saints Row games while trying to resolve some of the franchise's legacy in a way that the series reaches new players. On paper, I thought it was a good move. Unfortunately, the right intentions cannot completely mask this title's technical issues, gritty gameplay elements, unappealing story, characters, and often failed attempts at humor. There is very little in this game that other games haven't done better. Ultimately, it seems to be aimed at those who have fully embraced the core gameplay of Saints Row, but for the many reasons outlined above, many of those fans have already found reasons to turn their backs on this title. My biggest fear is that those who decided they hated Saints Row long before it was released will use the game's legitimate flaws as a way to justify their anger at the game and the people who made it. There are lessons to be learned from the successes and failures of Saints Row. All we can hope is that the talk surrounding this game doesn't get so venomous and intolerable that someone finally decides the franchise isn't even worth touching. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and support my channel.